Hello, everyone. Welcome. Whether you're joining us through audio or watching on YouTube, welcome to another episode of Dragonflight Heart Medicine Radio. I'm Kristen, your host, and with me today, I have a special guest, as always, and I'm pretty excited for some of the topics that we're going to be discussing because there are areas in my life and or business where I want to explore deeper. So I'm going to go ahead and have her introduce herself. Just tell us a little bit about you and why you're on the podcast today.
Oh, thank you, Kristen. Excited to be here. My name is Chrissy Marie, and in terms of what I'm up to in the world, I facilitate transformational breathwork. I also have a love for helping people activate their inner child, specifically the parts of them that are creative and playful, and a lot of parts that we kind of get divorced from as we grow up into adulthood. So I have a real love for helping people take themselves less seriously. And part of that is, so I do embodiment coaching, I do lifestyle coaching. Part of that is also teaching people how to create more space in their life, because a lot of the people that end up coming to me are very high achieving type A people who are doing all the courses and all the things, but they're still feeling like they're falling behind. They still feel like they don't have enough certifications, and they generally have a lot on their plate. So one of the things that I'm super passionate about is teaching people how to drop into their intuition and discern what stays on their plate and what can just go.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love that because a lot of times when we're talking about the inner child, we focus more on like the wounded part of the inner child and healing that, and forgetting that it's also about letting the inner child have space to play and be creative. And I know that I definitely don't do that enough. And I'm also like really interested in breath work. I know a little bit about that, and like I do yoga and stuff like that. But I've never done like just like pure breath work sessions, but I hear that they can be like really transformational. So let's kind of dive into some of the inner child stuff first, and then maybe some breath work. So how did you first like connect to your inner child so then you could eventually help other people do the same?
I was part of a membership back in maybe 2023, 24, not 2023. When I was 23 or 24, I was maybe like 6 or 7 years ago. And I was part of a membership program, and each month there was a theme, and we would explore it with a book and a podcast, a meditation, a workshop thing. And one of the months was inner child. And it was the first time I was ever introduced to having a structured, consistent relationship with a younger part of me. I always felt very connected to my inner child. I always felt like I still kept the threads of wonder and interest alive, meaning like I still sing, I still like to dance, I still love to do art and be out in nature. But I realized when I started opening up a very formal relationship, and by formal, I just mean like intentional, that I had gotten away from putting those things first because I felt like they weren't productive, or that they would distract me from being a bigger, better person in the world. And so, but what I realized very quickly is that when I started asking my inner child, what do you need to hear? And what would you like to do today? And I started having a conversation. I realized that a lot of my anxiety that I had from my late teens into my early 20s started to dissipate. It started to become less and less. And I was currently at the time a social worker, and I was working with families, specifically families whose children were at risk of being hospitalized for behavioral dysregulation or just intense behaviors. And I started bringing this inner child work to these mostly mothers that I worked with, and talking to them about their childhood and how they wish they had been raised. And it had an enormous impact on the quality and the effectiveness of the work I was doing as a social worker, watching these moms start to connect to themselves as little girls. And I just realized, whoa, there's something here for everybody. This is not just helpful for me, but it's also having an impact on mothers and their kids. And so I really became a passion of mine. That is when I started focusing on it. And it's actually what drove me to leave social work and just do this inner child focused work full time. Because I couldn't do it with every family I was working with as a social worker. Some families weren't ready or at that level of having that conversation with themselves.
Wow, that's just so beautiful, connecting to the inner child in that way, and assisting families instead of just like one person. And I wonder if that's sometimes why parents really push their children to do ballet or to do soccer, because they didn't maybe get to do those things, or they did, but are they like reliving their childhood through their children. You hear about that happening a lot. And I know for me, I too have taken several different like classes and things like that. And the inner child keeps coming back up. And I also feel like sometimes there's, we have inner children, that is like plural, and we have all the different ages. And depending on certain experiences or certain traumatic events, like sometimes we get stuck in certain inner children. What are some like strategies or some tips that you could share that could really help people to connect to their inner child and start to nurture a relationship if they have not done so already? If they haven't started, like what's like, just like the bare, like something really easy just to get so you started connecting with that part of yourself.
I love that question. So, and the answer will vary depending on the intensity of trauma you have, because I had some clients who don't remember their childhood at all, and others who very much remember it, but they remember it being really scary or tumultuous, challenging for them. So, what I like to start with is just getting curious about what you were curious about as a child. Some people don't remember playing, so I don't usually start with play. I'll start with like, what did you wonder about when you were little? Like, what were some of the things that sparked your curiosity? And just starting to write those things down. For a lot of people, it's like animals or plants or Legos, or I only remember drawing, a certain symbol on pieces of paper from when I was a kid, and just starting to gather like little reference points for you being a child and being an open, curious human being. And then I asked, well, what are you curious about today? Like, what piques your curiosity today? Because that is an element of your inner child that's looking to be nurtured. Children love to follow their curiosity. So I start usually with curiosity. For some people, it's helpful to have a picture of themselves as a child, or an image or a symbol that represents who they feel like they were as a kid. And then to check in with that picture or that symbol every day and just like ask, hey, what do you need to hear from me right now? Or, hey, what would be fun for us to do today? And so starting to just gently open up a dialogue with that part of you. And again, it would vary. Some people have a hard time with that, and other people are like, oh yeah, we've been talking, and like their inner child's really, really energetic. So, but that's where I'd start with a lot of people.
That's really beautiful too. I keep saying that word beautiful, and I love this and I love that, but I do just like picturing and the whole curiosity thing. So I notice when I stay more curious about things, I don't get as like stressed out, or there's not as much anxiety around it. So even if the problem seems huge that I'm facing, if I can just come at it more like, well, if this was somebody else, or, just taking a step back and staying curious, like, how could I possibly find a solution to this problem? Or like, what can I do in this moment? Even if I feel overwhelmed, even if I feel panicky, like what's something that I can do? Or, getting creative or journaling or any of those things, I feel it can really help. And I know for me, my inner child loves to do art and loves to dance. And if I'm not doing those things at least like once a week, like I start to get really crabby and
Mm-hmm.
depressed. And like this has been a great reminder for me, like, oh yeah, like it's not just like a one-time conversation or a one-time afternoon we spend with our inner child. Like this is something we're cultivating over our adult life. And sometimes we think like, oh, I already did the inner child stuff, I'm good. It's kind of like, well, maybe, but it's kind of like
Mm-hmm.
this ongoing thing, I feel like.
I agree with you. I think it is very much ongoing. And circling back to something you said in the beginning, which is it's easy to focus, or a lot of people are more familiar with shadow work and working with the denser, more intense parts of the inner child. And there's another phrase, the wounded child versus the wonder child. And sometimes we can get stuck just processing things, and I've been with and sat with a lot of people who are very comfortable being in a place of processing their trauma or processing with their inner child from the wounded perspective, but they're a lot more uncomfortable when it comes to allowing time and space to paint a picture or to draw or to do something that maybe society or their parents deemed was unproductive or out of purpose for them. So that's where I like to bring some balance and some levity into the space. It's like, let's also engage with pleasure, because that is equally a part of our inner child as some of the more uncomfortable conversations, which will, like you said, will always be here for as long as we're growing and stepping outside of our comfortable spaces. We're going to be activating the inner child for the rest of our life.
Right. It's
Plural, children.
yes, yes, the inner children. And it's interesting that you bring up shadow work and talk about how even though that part of it is really messy and like it's really putting yourself in a raw, vulnerable space, that most of us would rather do that or find that easier than actually like allowing the inner child to like play. It's almost like we get so attached to sitting with the shadow and all the emotions that we forget, or at least I know for me, like I'm pretty deep in the thick of healing a lot of trauma that happened recently that triggered a lot of stuff from childhood. And it's, like this big, like all these layers and stuff are unfolding, and I feel really anxious the majority of the time. So to like actually be still can sometimes be hard. That's why like I have found like doing dance or like yoga is really helpful first, and then maybe I can sit down and journal, or not trying to force myself, but there is like this hunger inside of me to create. Like my inner child is like, I'm bored, I want to do stuff, and then as the adult, like having to work and having a job and scheduling, it's like yeah, but I do intend to start, even if it's only like 10 minutes a day that I like journal or draw or color, like giving that to myself, I think is what I'm gonna start doing, just starting small and not beating myself up if I miss a day or two, but
Oh my gosh,
not
that's
that just,
huge.
yeah.
I like to joke that the best thing I ever did for myself is like significantly lower the bar that I was holding over my head, because I would set these really high expectations that were rooted in shoulds. Like, I should be super consistent. I should do my meditation for exactly this many minutes every single day. And if I don't, my day's ruined. And I should just start over next week. Just like these really dramatic bars. What I learned along the way is that celebrating those tiny micro successes, or places of follow through, or returning back to our aliveness is the key to changing our habits and behaviors and the way we feel about things. So I love that you spoke to like not being hard on yourself for skipping a day, doing really small things. And I love that you spoke to how space can be unnerving or can make you feel uneasy or maybe a little unsafe. And that you allow yourself to move first before going into more of a quiet, stoic place. There's so much I could say on that. I find that to be so, so important, is meeting yourself where you're at.
Yeah, meeting yourself where you're at is really important. And I too feel like I need to work on that, like lowering the bar. And it was when I was younger, it was a lot easier to get to that bar because the goals were like get all A's in school, things like that. So it was really easy to meet these goals. And it's like but then as an adult, having like this disconnect with, oh, well, like these goals are a little bit more broad, or they might take more time to accomplish, or they're just rooted in the shoulds and the perfection and not in what I actually can or want to do. And kind of, like figuring out how to lower the bar, but in like a healthy way, not to where I completely give up and do nothing, but where, where I'm not as hard on myself. Like, it's like we all have that drill sergeant, and for some of us, it's really loud. And for some of us, it's a little quieter.
Yes. And I love that you spoke to it potentially for some of us being easier to hit the bar as kids because the linear steps to getting the A or getting the praise were pretty clear. Whereas now as adults, they're more ambiguous, especially if you're trying to live life on your terms. Now it's like, okay, instead of following the teacher, we're talking to intuition, which is this like mystical, immeasurable force that we weren't taught to follow when we were little for most of us. So breaking things down into like the micro steps that we need to achieve them and focusing on just the next step has been huge for my drill sergeant brain, and also for my inner Capricorn. Like I love checking off boxes. And so if I can break something down to its micro elements and focus on just celebrating each tiny step, then I'm generally in a better space.
Yeah, I love the micro steps, and I'm a big lister. Like I love to make lists, and it just feels so good when you can like check things off. And sometimes I'll even like on my list, I'll put something ridiculously easy just so I have a chance to check something off.
Yes,
it's like a really hard list. I'm like, laundry, like something super easy. I'll just like check that off, or like the easiest thing to do just so I can have more check marks.
It's like micro celebration moments. I think it's genius. I think it's brilliant.
Yeah. So yeah, that's all like the inner child stuff. And then you also do some things, with breath work. So can you speak a little bit more to that? I know there's a few different styles of breath work or types of breath work, and it kind of gets thrown around a little bit, but what do you tend to focus on?
Yeah, I mean, it's an ancient technique, and there's so many ways you can manipulate your breath to create different experiences. The way that I teach it, I use a technique called conscious connected breathing, which is just a gentle inhale. And when you get to the top, you're just immediately going into your exhale. And the pacing at which you're breathing is faster than your regular breath. So you're just picking up the pace. And what it does is it hyperoxygenates the body and it creates a detoxing effect. The breath will generally activate any stuck or stagnant energy. So any feelings that you have kind of stuffed into your system, whether that's pleasure, whether you've maybe swallowed a laugh because you were afraid of being too much, or you swallowed a cry or a scream, whatever you've swallowed, whatever you've stacked into the body or stored into the body will generally come forward during a breathwork session. And you'll get an experience to release that, to just either cry or to giggle or to growl. And it's very, very liberating. And that's another way of connecting to the inner child I found is through your senses. So getting back to like touch, smell, seeing, like hearing, all of the things that we were drawn to as kids, like when I was like 1 or 2 years old, my favorite thing to do was like take off a wet diaper that I was wearing and like peel it apart, because like the cotton and the wet, and like, I didn't know I was sitting in my own pee. I was like, this just feels good. Painting the wall with it, horrifying my parents. Like just, we get into so much when we're kids because we're curious, but we also just want to have a sensory experience. So breath work is a very sensory experience, and it brings us right back into the body, back into the place that holds so much wisdom and artistic creativity. And it just wakes it back up. It stirs our pain, but it also stirs our creativity and our intuition. So at the end of a breathwork ceremony, I often hear, oh my gosh, I got exactly what I needed, or I know the next step, or I feel confident and convicted again. It plugs us back into our power.
Yeah, that's great. The plugging back into our power. Because, and I like how you refer to it as swallowing emotions,
Mm,
like holding them back. Cause I know, at least for me and several other people, like when you're holding back tears, like where do you feel it? In your throat. You get that like restriction. It's like you're not allowing yourself to move through it. And I love how something so simple as the breath, just manipulating that can like unlock it and release it.
mhm.
And sometimes like in some of the yogas that I'm doing, they'll do like some kind of breath work exercise in the beginning. And it's not what you're discussing, but it might be like the alternate nostril breathing or anything. And it just like, sometimes I'm like, oh, I don't want to do this because I
Mm,
know that it's going to bring some stuff up and I'm going to end up crying.
yeah.
But I always feel better. It may not be right away, but I
Mm,
always feel better if I just go ahead and let myself cry. If I swallow those feelings or push it off till later, it starts to build and build and build. And then the
mhm.
smallest thing, like my neighbor accidentally dropping something and it's like in the kitchen upstairs, like will send me into like a panic attack.
Yeah.
And so, but it's hard, as adults, because we've just been conditioned to like not feel, or there's times when it's appropriate and times when it's not. So
Mhm.
like if I'm in the middle of work and a student says something that triggers me, like I have to hold my stuff together. I can't just like cry. Not that that
Right.
ever happens because I have great students, but just as an example,
Mhm.
um, but I like how you make it like the breath work is so quick. Like
Mm,
it's not like you have to spend so much time retracing your steps to go back to those feelings. It just like, comes right up.
totally. Yeah. It's wild.
Yeah. How long have you been, doing breath work and offering, like, I know you offer a lot of Facebook breath work sessions.
Yeah. For breath work, I started beginning of 2020. So it's been about two years since I started offering that.
Yeah, I keep wanting to go to one and then something things keep coming up, but I hope that it aligns because I'm really, really curious to add another tool to my toolkit to help with some of these stagnant emotions because
Yeah.
yeah, they're
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. Yeah. And I offer the breath work I offer virtually for anybody who's listening and is curious about it. I generally do two online group sessions a month, and they go for about an hour. And I don't know if you knew about, do you know about my membership,
I do
Kristen?
not. Mm-mm.
So I do have, this might be something for you. The membership, you get access to all of the replays of the breathwork ceremony. So you can do them on your own time if you can't make a live
Yeah.
ceremony. You have like a whole library of that. Um, and then you also have access to a bunch of videos where I teach you how to regulate the nervous system and work with the inner child and things like that. So it's kind of like a private content library as well for people
Yeah,
who
that's
want to learn
I'm
more about that.
definitely interested in that because that's the biggest thing I'm working on now is like recalibrating my nervous system after so much trauma that happened last year
Right.
because it's still so fresh. And
Right.
even though the things that were happening are no longer happening, to my nervous system is still just very fight or flight
Right.
because it's just taking time for me to like feel safe again in my body and in my
Mhm.
environment. And so that's something that keeps coming up. Like I have found like 2 or 3 talks recently, like on YouTube, that is all about regulating the nervous system. And then you bring it up. I'm like,
Yeah.
yes, the nerve, like recalibrating and just working with our nervous system is so important because when we're in
Mhm.
that high stress, yeah, it's just not good long
Mhm.
term. It's not meant for
Mhm.
us to be in that state every day. You know,
Right.
we're only
Right.
meant to be in it when there's actual like danger
Mhm.
evolutionarily. So yeah,
Mhm.
definitely interested in possibly doing the membership. And I'm sure some people watching or listening might be too. So as always, like I'll share, if you just email me or send me a Facebook message with any of your
Yeah.
social media, website, email, whatever, so people can learn more.
Perfect.
And I'm not even sure how long we've been going for, but it feels kind of like we're organically wrapping up. Is there anything else you want to share about yourself or about the work that you do?
Mm. The message that keeps coming up for me a lot is around the importance of creating space for ourselves to hear our intuition and creating space in our body. But one of the biggest realizations for me as I was learning how to connect with my nervous system and my inner child is that we often need to take up space first before we can create it. Meaning that in order to release stuck energy from the body, we have to go back into, so when energy is like, just a quick, like little 101 on the nervous system, when energy gets trapped in the body and it gets stored, and that happens over and over, sometimes we can go into a very flat, shut down place. It's called a dorsal response. And it's kind of like, a turtle going into its shell, and we can kind of like live in this numbed out, it's kind of a numbed out state. And it generally happens when we've had so much stress that our body can't process it and doesn't know what to do with it. So it just like swallows it, puts it in a closet, and then tries to avoid it. And in order to get back up to a place of connection, we need to go back through a fight or flight response. Meaning we need to, like, if you were to look at an animal who had just kind of played dead, it gets up and then it shakes a lot to release all of the trauma it just experienced. And then it moves up and goes on. And that's generally what needs to happen with us, is if we're in a state of like shut down, very flat, very numbed out, often we need to have a big release, whether that's through dancing like you do, or screaming or crying or shaking. We need to get into our animal body and take up a lot of space expressively before we can feel calm and intuitive. And that changed my life, because I was always trying to like mentally masturbate my way out of anxiety. I'd tried to think about it. And literally, if anybody watched me, I would just be a very rigid, like heady, like sitting still, like not moving, very quiet, very still. And then I learned about having to take up space. And so now it's liberated me in a big way. To know that whenever I'm feeling anxious, I need a good cry, or I need to go take a big breath, or I need to go scream or punch a pillow. And so I think I'm speaking into that because I know a lot of us have been taught that all of those things are obnoxious or makes us too much, or we might not be safe if we take up space. And so permission from one fully grown adult to another, that is actually a very healthy expression of stagnant energy. And I'm just planting the seed that we all lean into our more primitive, wild, liberated expression of energy, the more natural expression of energy.
Yes, absolutely. And I love that you bring that up, because there's so many times where I'll feel anxious and I don't know why. So then I instantly go into my mind and I start to analyze, well, when did I start feeling anxious? Why am I feeling anxious? Is it because of this? Is it because of that? Is it because of this? Is it because of that? And then I'm just like stuck in my mind, and my body is still experiencing the anxiety. And then even if I do find the reason, and it's like, oh, it's just because my refrigerator is making this weird noise. Like, but my body is still feeling anxious just because I understood it with my mind doesn't necessarily fix it. So right. Yeah, I always I cry a lot. That feels great. And that's just a reminder of me, like if I'm feeling anxious, to just like move my body and allow whatever comes up to come up to be processed. Because when I did go through the really traumatic experience last year, I was definitely like, so much was happening that in order to survive, I had to shut down. And so now that I'm slowly starting to feel safe and relax, it's like my body is like feeling safe enough to like finally like express and process all of that. And it's been really interesting. Like I feel like this conversation is just perfect and full of really great reminders for exactly where I'm at right now.
Oh, perfect.
And I'm sure, people watching or listening are in a, similar state, because there's just so much going on for everybody. Collectively, individually, it's a lot. And it can be stressful for sure.
Yeah. Celebrating you and the fact that you allow yourself to cry and are normalizing that as well as healthy expression.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna start punching pillows. That sounds great. Or like
fully support
and screaming into the pillow, like, yeah, because sometimes it I feel like I should cry or I want to cry, but really my body, I'm like, a part of me is angry and it's like, no, I don't need to cry. I need to like just scream.
Yeah.
Or like punch something. Yeah.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. This has been great and a lot of really good stuff packed into like a short time together. It was a pleasure to have you on. And once again, her information will be in the description section so you can learn more about the breath work or connecting to your inner child and regulating the nervous system. So thank you everyone for watching or listening, and I'll see you next time.